Welcome to Sleepy Harbor. Tonight you do not have to do anything at all. You can let your shoulders drop away from your ears. You can let the weight of the day, whatever it held, begin to settle somewhere below you like sediment drifting slowly to the bottom of a still pond. There is nothing here you need to figure out, nowhere else you need to be, nothing you must remember by morning. If your eyes are already heavy, let them close. The words will keep coming, soft and unhurried, and you can simply drift along on them like a small boat, loosed gently from its dock. Wherever you are right now, whatever the hour, feel free to let us know, down below, what time it is for you and where in the world you are listening from. It is a quiet comfort somehow to know there are others out there in the dark, lying down just as you are, on the far side of the world or in the next town over. All of us settling in together. Take one slow, deep breath with me now. In, gently, and out, slower still. Let yourself sink just a little into wherever you are lying. Thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Harbor. Let us begin. I want to tell you something that is happening inside your head right now, or something very close to it, even as you lie here and your thoughts begin to loosen. It is one of the strangest and most beautiful discoveries science has made about sleep. And it is the kind of thing that once you know it, makes the whole act of going to bed feel less like switching off and more like opening a door. Here it is. While you are awake, your brain is hard at work, and like any hard-working thing, it makes a mess. It burns through fuel, it fires its countless connections, and in doing so, it leaves behind a kind of metabolic litter, tiny waste products that build up through the day the way crumbs gather on a kitchen counter while you are busy cooking. The brain needs to clean all of that away, but here is the surprising part. It mostly cannot do this thorough cleaning while you are awake and using it. It waits. It waits for you to fall asleep. And when you do, something remarkable happens. The cells of your brain physically shrink. The little spaces between them, the gaps and channels that thread through all that grey matter, open wider. In studies of sleeping mice, researchers found that this space between the brain cells expanded by around 60% during sleep. Picture a crowded room where everyone has been standing shoulder to shoulder all day, and then all at once everyone takes a single step back, and suddenly there are wide aisles where there were none. That is roughly what your sleeping brain does. It makes room. And through those newly opened channels, a tide comes in. Cerebrospinal fluid, the clear, water-like liquid that bathes your brain and spinal cord, begins to wash through far more freely than it ever could while you were awake. It flows along the passages around your blood vessels, rinsing through the tissue, carrying the day's waste away with it. A tide washing in and out, cleaning as it goes. This was shown in a landmark study published in the journal Science in 2013 by a team led by a researcher named Z. Cells shrinking, the spaces widening by 60%, the fluid flooding through, and almost all of it happening only when the animal was asleep. Sit with that for a moment gently as you lie there. It means that sleep is not an absence of activity. It is not your brain going dark and idle, like a house with the lights switched off and nobody home. It is closer to the opposite. Sleep is when the most important housekeeping of the day finally gets to happen. It is, in a real sense, the most productive thing your brain does all day. The night shift, the maintenance window, the hours when the machine, finally left alone by the daytime crew, can at last be properly serviced. We tend to think of sleep as lost time, time we surrender reluctantly because our bodies insist on it, time we would happily skip if only we could, so we could get more done. But the truth that science keeps uncovering, layer after layer, is almost the reverse. The work does not stop when you sleep. The work begins. And tonight, slowly and gently, with nothing for you to do but listen and let go, I want to walk you through that work. I want to take you down, stage by stage, into a single night of sleep and show you what is actually happening in there, in the dark, behind your closed eyes while you rest. There is so much waiting in this journey. There is a stage later on where your body becomes completely paralyzed, held perfectly still on purpose, and that paralysis can quite literally save your life. We will get there. There is the brain's own plumbing system, the one we have only just begun to glimpse, washing through in slow waves you can now actually see on a scanner. We will get there too. And there is a creature with no brain at all, none in the way you and I have one, that still somehow sleeps, which tells us that sleep may be older and deeper than thought itself. All of that is ahead of us, but let us not rush. Let us take the descent slowly, the way you take it every night, without ever noticing, sinking down one gentle step at a time. So picture this. Picture you tonight, lying just as you are now. Your breathing has begun to slow. Your thoughts have started to drift and wander, no longer marching in their daytime lines. And without your noticing the exact moment, you begin to fall. A night of sleep is not one long, flat, uniform thing. It is not a single deep pool you slip into and float in until morning. It has architecture. It has shape and structure and movement, like a piece of music with its quiet passages and its swelling ones. Your sleep moves through cycles, and each cycle lasts on average around 90 minutes. Some run a little shorter, some a little longer, anywhere from about 70 minutes to 120, but 90 is the gentle heartbeat at the center of it. And across a full night, a typical adult moves through 4 to 6 of these cycles, one after another, riding them like long, slow swells on a calm sea. But here is the first thing that makes a night of sleep so much more interesting than people usually imagine. Those cycles are not all the same. They are not identical copies, stamped out one after another. The night is asymmetric. It is lopsided, and beautifully so. In the first part of the night, the early cycles are dominated by the deepest kind of sleep, the heavy, slow, restorative kind we will come to know as slow-wave sleep. The brain front-loads it. It dives for the depths early in the first third of the night when you have only just gone under. That is when the deepest, most physically restorative work gets done, while the rest of the journey is still ahead of you. And then, as the night wears on, as you move from the second cycle into the third and the fourth and beyond, something shifts. The deep sleep gives way more and more to dreaming, to the strange, vivid, electric stage we call REM, the stage where dreams live. And these dreaming periods grow. The very first one, early in the night, might last only a few minutes, a brief flicker. But the last one, near morning, can stretch on for 30 minutes, even 60. The dreams are saved for dawn. They lengthen and deepen and grow more vivid the closer you drift toward waking. This is the quiet reason why, so often, the dream you actually remember is the one you were having just before your eyes opened. It is fresh, and it was long, and it was rich, because the architecture of the night was building toward it the whole time. Deep sleep at the start when you most need restoring. Dreams saved for the end, ripening as the hours pass. It is an arc, a slow and deliberate arc, and it has a logic to it that we are only beginning to fully understand. So when you lie down tonight and let yourself sink, know that you are not stepping into a flat, featureless darkness. You are stepping onto a path that descends and rises and descends again with a different character at every hour. Let us take that first step down. The very first stage of sleep is the lightest of them all. It is the doorway, the threshold between waking and sleeping. Scientists call it N1, and it is the briefest of the stages, lasting usually only 1 to 7 minutes, and making up only around 5% of your whole night. It is the shallow water at the edge of the sea where your feet still touch the sand. In this stage, your brain begins to change the kind of electrical waves it produces. When you are awake and alert, your brain hums along in fast, busy little waves. But as you slip into N1, those quickened patterns slow and soften into something called theta waves. You can think of the brain's electrical activity as the surface of water. When you are awake, the surface is choppy, full of small, quick ripples churned up by all the thinking and seeing and doing of the day. As you enter N1, the wind dies down, and those choppy ripples smooth out into longer, slower, rolling swells. Theta waves are those slower, rolling swells. The first sign that the storm of the day is passing. N1 is a strange and dreamlike borderland, and you may know it better than you think. This is the stage where your mind drifts into odd little half-dreams, fragments of images that float up out of nowhere, a face, a staircase, a sense of falling. These are called hypnagogic images, and they are the loose, untethered pictures the mind paints as it begins to let go of the daytime world. They do not have to make sense. They are simply the brain slipping its moorings. And N1 is also home to a sensation almost everyone has felt. You are just drifting off, sinking sweetly towards sleep, and suddenly your whole body jolts a sharp, involuntary twitch, as though you have missed a step or stumbled off a curb. Sometimes it comes with a vivid little flash of falling. That jerk has a name. It is called a hypnic jerk, and it happens right here, in this lightest stage, on the very threshold of sleep. No one is entirely certain why it happens, but it is harmless, and it is common, and it is simply one of the small, strange ways your body lets go of the day. If you have ever felt it and wondered what it was, now you know. It was you crossing the threshold. It was the first step down. Because N1 is so light, you can be woken from it very easily, and if you are, you might not even believe you were asleep at all. People nudged awake from N1 will often insist they were still lying there awake, just resting their eyes. The water is still shallow here, the shore is still close, but you do not linger long, you sink further, and as you do, you pass from N1 into the stage where you will spend more of your night than any other. This second stage is called N2, and it is, in a quiet way, the great workhorse of your sleep. If N1 is the doorway, N2 is the long hallway you spend most of the night walking down. It makes up somewhere between 45 and 55% of an adult's total sleep, more than any other single stage, more than the deep sleep, more than the dreaming. Over the course of a night, more than half of your sleep is spent here in N2, so whatever happens in this stage matters enormously simply because there is so much of it. And two extraordinary things happen here, two distinct signatures that mark N2 out from every other stage, two little electrical events that a scientist watching a recording of your sleeping brain could spot in an instant and say, there, that one is in N2. The first is called a sleep spindle. A sleep spindle is a brief, sudden burst of fast brain activity, a quick flurry of waves at a frequency of around 11 to 16 cycles per second that rises up, lasts perhaps a second or so, and then fades away again. On a recording, it has a shape that tapers at both ends and bulges in the middle, a little like the spindle of thread it is named after, or a grain of rice. These spindles flicker up again and again through your N2 sleep, little bursts of activity blooming and fading in the otherwise slowing rhythm of your brain. And these spindles are not idle flickers. They appear to be doing at least two important jobs at once, and both of them are quietly wonderful. The first job is protection. The sleep spindle seems to act as a kind of gate, a guard standing at the door of your sleeping mind, keeping the outside world from waking you. While the spindles are firing, the brain becomes better at holding the line against noise and disturbance from the world around you, the creak of the house, the passing car, the murmur from another room. Think of a parent who can sleep soundly through traffic and storms, but who wakes instantly at the smallest cry from their child's room. The brain in N2 is doing something a little like that, sorting what matters from what does not, letting the harmless sounds wash past while staying ready for the one that truly counts. The spindle is part of how it gates out the noise, so that you can stay asleep, so that you can stay down here in the quiet hallway and keep doing the work the night requires. And the second job of the spindle is even more remarkable, though we will return to it more fully later when the whole picture has come together. The spindles appear to be deeply involved in memory, in taking the things you learned and did and felt during the day and helping to file them, to fix them in place, to weave them into the lasting fabric of who you are. So even here, in this long middle hallway of your sleep, a kind of careful sorting and storing is going on. The day is being tidied and put away. The second signature of N2 is called a K-complex. Where the spindle is a quick flurry, the K-complex is a single, large, slow wave, one big rolling swell that rises up sharply and then sinks, the largest single event you will see in a healthy sleeping brain. It is as if, every so often, one great wave passes through the otherwise calm water, lifting everything and setting it down again. K-complexes can happen on their own, or they can be triggered by a sound or a touch from the outside world, and like the spindles, they seem to be part of how the brain manages the boundary between your sleep and your surroundings, deciding, again and again throughout the night, this is nothing, sleep on, stay down, all is well. So picture it now. You have slipped through the doorway of N1 past the drifting half-dreams and the little jolt of the hypnic jerk, and you have settled into the long, quiet hallway of N2, where you will spend the greatest part of your night. Spindles bloom and fade in your brain, standing guard at the gate, holding the noise of the world at bay, quietly sorting the memories of your day. Great, slow K-complexes roll through now and then like single, deep swells passing under your small, drifting boat. Your breathing has slowed, your heart has slowed, your body temperature has begun, ever so slightly, to fall. You are deeply, genuinely asleep now in the stage where most of your night is spent. And yet this is not the bottom. This is not the deepest place you will go tonight. Below N2, below this long, quiet hallway, there is a deeper chamber still, the heaviest and most restorative sleep of all, where the brain's electrical waves grow vast and slow and powerful, where you become so profoundly asleep that the world could go on without you, and where, in the dark and the stillness, that great cleansing tide we began with finally comes fully in. That is where we are headed, you and I, a little deeper still, a little later on. But before we go down there, let me leave a few small lanterns lit along the path ahead, a few quiet promises of what is still to come, so that you can drift toward them gently. There is, as I told you, a stage where your body will be held completely and utterly paralyzed, every muscle stilled on purpose by your own brain, and where, for a small number of people, that switch fails to flip. And what happens then can serve as an early warning of something that may not arrive for years. There is the full story of the brain's astonishing plumbing system, the one that washes it clean, and how researchers manage to actually film those slow tides of fluid pulsing into a living human brain, caught on a scanner in time with the great slow waves of deep sleep. And there is that creature I mentioned, the one with no brain at all in the way you and I understand it, drifting in warm, shallow water that still settles each night into something unmistakably like sleep, telling us that this thing we do, this nightly surrender, maybe older than thinking itself, older than memory, woven into the deepest fabric of what it means to be alive. All of that is ahead, but none of it is for now. For now, there is only this, the slow swell of your breath, the quiet hallway of N2 holding you safe, the spindles standing their gentle watch, the great waves rolling slowly through the dark water of your sleeping mind, and the long, soft descent still waiting below you, drawing you down deeper into the restful deep. Let us pause here, just for a moment, you and I. Take one more slow, deep breath in through the nose, gently, and let it go even more slowly than before. Notice how much heavier your body feels now than when we began. Notice the quiet that has gathered around you. There is nothing you need to do with any of this. You do not need to remember the stages or the names or the numbers. Let them wash over you the way the cerebrospinal fluid washes through the sleeping brain, carrying away whatever you do not need, leaving only the calm. When you are ready, and only when you are ready, we will continue down together into the deep. So let yourself keep sinking. The first cycle of your night is well underway. You came in through the shallow doorway of N1 with its theta waves and its drifting half-pictures and that small, startled jolt that no one fully understands. You moved into the long, workhorse hallway of N2, where you will spend most of your hours, where the spindles guard the gate and file the day away, where the great K complexes roll through one by one. And now the floor of that hallway begins gently to slope downward again, deeper than before, toward the heaviest and most healing sleep your body knows how to make. The brain's fast, busy rhythms of the day are far behind you now. The choppy water has long since smoothed. Even the rolling theta swells of those first light stages are giving way to something larger and slower still, waves that grow taller and broader and lazier the deeper you go, until they become the vast, unhurried rollers of true, deep sleep. Your breathing has found its slowest and steadiest rhythm of the night. Your heartbeat has settled into a calm, even drum. The muscles of your face have gone slack and soft. If someone were to walk into the room and speak your name, you might not stir at all. You have gone down past the reach of the small sounds of the world. And it is here, in this deepest place, with the lights of the daytime brain finally and fully dimmed, that the great work of the night truly begins to unfold. It is here that the channels open their widest. It is here that the tide we spoke of at the very beginning, that clear, washing tide of fluid, comes flooding fully in, sweeping through the open spaces, rinsing the day away. It is here that the brain, at last left entirely to itself, gets to do the deep and patient maintenance it could never manage while you were awake and asking things of it. We are standing now at the threshold of that deepest chamber. The slow waves are gathering, the tide is beginning to turn and rise, and in just a little while, when we step down into it together, I will show you exactly what flows through and what it carries away, and why the discovery of it has quietly changed the way scientists think about what sleep is truly for, but not yet. For now, simply rest here at the top of the long, slow slope, with your breath moving in and out like the tide itself, slow and certain and unhurried. You are safe, you are held. The night is doing its work, and you have nothing to do but let it. Down below, the deep sleep waits, broad and dark and gentle as deep water, ready to receive you. Let me step back for a moment before we go down into that deep water and tell you something that may surprise you. You might think of what is happening right now in this stillness as a kind of shutting down. The body quiet, the face slack, the world held at arm's length. It looks like nothing. It looks like the brain has simply switched off for the evening, the way you might turn off a lamp at the end of a long day. But that is not what is happening, not even close. This is the strange and lovely truth I want to carry you toward tonight. The sleeping brain is not resting in the way we usually mean that word. In this deepest stretch, it is more active in some ways than it is when you are awake and reading and thinking and going about your day. It has simply traded one kind of work for another. By day, it gathers and reaches and reacts. By night, it cleans, it sorts, it repairs, it files. Sleep is not the absence of work. Sleep is the brain's most important shift, and it can only clock in once you have finally let go. There were scientists who measured this. In a study published in the journal Science in the year 2013, a group led by a researcher named Maiken Nedergaard watched what happened in the sleeping brain, and they found something almost hard to believe. The space between the brain cells, the tiny gaps that thread through all that grey tissue, widened by around 60% during sleep. 60%. The cells themselves drew in a little, made themselves smaller, the way you might pull in your elbows to let someone pass in a narrow hallway, and into all that newly opened space, the clear fluid came rushing. That is the tide, that is the very thing your breath has been keeping time with all this while. We will go right down into it together soon. For now, it is enough to know that it is real, that it was watched and measured, that what feels like nothing happening is in fact the busiest and most careful hour of your whole day. So let us not call this sleep a switching off. Let us call it what it is, a turning inward, a maintenance shift. The lights of the front rooms go dark so the deep rooms can finally get to work. Now, before we descend, I want to show you the shape of the whole night, the way you might stand on a hill at dusk and see the whole valley laid out below before you walk down into it. Because the night is not one long, flat stretch of the same thing. It has an architecture, it has a shape, and the shape is not what most people imagine. A night of sleep moves in cycles. Each one runs for somewhere around 90 minutes, give or take, and across a whole night, you will pass through 4, 5, sometimes 6 of them. You might picture them as identical, like waves of the same size rolling in one after another, even and matching, but they are not the same, not at all. The night is lopsided. It leans. Here is how it leans. The deep sleep, the kind we are standing at the edge of right now, the kind with the great slow waves and the open channels and the washing tide, that deep sleep crowds into the first part of the night. It front-loads. The brain seems to know that the cleaning and the repairing are urgent, and so it does the heaviest of that work early, in the first cycle or two, while the pressure to sleep is strongest. The first deep stretch of the night is the deepest you will go, and the dreaming. The vivid, strange, story-filled dreaming, the kind that lives in a stage we have not visited yet, that gets saved for later. It comes in small amounts at first, only a few minutes in the early cycles. And then, as the night goes on, as the hours turn toward morning, those dreaming stretches grow longer and longer and richer and richer. The last one, just before you wake, may run for half an hour or more. That is the reason, the simple and lovely reason, that the dreams you remember are almost always the ones from near dawn. They are the ones nearest to the surface when you finally rise. The night gives you cleaning first and dreams last, and it does it in that order for reasons we will come to understand. So that is the valley below us. Deep work, front-loaded into the early dark. Dreaming saved like something held in reserve for the coming light. But to get all the way down to that deepest place, the place we are perched above right now, you do not simply fall there. You step down into it gently, one stage at a time. And you have already taken those first steps tonight, though you may not have noticed. Let me walk you back through them slowly so you can feel how the descent works. The very first step down is a stage the scientists call N1. It is the lightest sleep there is, the thinnest skin of it, the drowsy doorway between waking and gone. It lasts only a minute or so, maybe up to 7, before you slip past it. In this stage, the brain begins to slow, and a particular rhythm rises in it, a slow and rolling rhythm the researchers named theta waves. Your thoughts begin to loosen and drift and come unmoored from each other, and it is in this thin doorway that 2 odd and gentle things can happen. The first is the falling feeling, that sudden jolt, the sense that you have missed a step on a staircase that was never there. The scientists call it a hypnic jerk, and it is harmless, simply the body twitching at the threshold of sleep. The second is the drifting pictures, the faces and shapes and little half-scenes that float up behind your closed eyes before any real dream begins. They are called hypnagogic images, the loose first sketches of a mind letting go. This whole light doorway is only a small part of your night, around 5% of it, a stage you pass through quickly and rarely remember. And then you step down again deeper into the stage they call N2. And this, of all the stages, is the one you spend the most of your night inside. Nearly half of it, more than any other single stretch. If the deep sleep is the heavy machinery of the night, N2 is the patient, steady workhorse that carries most of the load. 2 strange signatures rise in the brain during this stage, and I want to give you their names because they are doing something quietly remarkable for you. The first are the sleep spindles, short, quick bursts of fast brain rhythm, flickering at around 11 to 16 cycles a second, gone almost as soon as they come. They are thought to be doing 2 things at once. They help to file away the memories of your day, tucking them into longer keeping, and they also stand at the gate, these spindles, helping to hold the outside world at bay, dampening the small sounds and stirrings of the room so that you can stay down, so that the name spoken at the door does not pull you back up. The second signature is the K complex, a single great slow wave that rolls through now and then, large and solitary, a quiet keeper of the deepening peace. And so here you are, carried by the spindles and the slow K complexes, gated softly away from the waking world, resting at the top of the long slope. Below you, the deep water waits, and in it, 3 things I have promised you, and not yet shown. A paralysis that can save your life. A plumbing system the brain can only run while you are unconscious. And, strangest of all, a creature with no brain at all that still lies down in its own way and sleeps. And now the slope deepens. The spindles thin and quiet, the K complexes space further apart, and something large and slow begins to rise in the brain's electrical field. This is the border you are crossing now from the middling shallows into the true deep. From N2 into N3, and N3 is something else entirely. The brain waves that mark it are called delta waves. They are the slowest the brain produces in ordinary sleep, less than 4 full cycles a second, and they have a particular quality on the tracing that you would recognize even if you had never studied a single page of neuroscience. They are big, enormous compared to what came before. Long, rolling, high-amplitude hills moving across the readout, the way you would draw a child's picture of a wave if you wanted it to look as wide and smooth and unhurried as possible. When you see them, you know the person sleeping before you has gone somewhere genuinely deep. This is slow wave sleep. This is the floor of the night. The first thing to know about it is how hard it is to come back from. In N1, a gentle sound can lift you. In N2, a louder one might. But here, in N3, the distance between where you are and waking is significant in a way that is almost physical to observe. If someone were to shake your shoulder now, your return would be slow and confused. You would surface like someone pulled up from depth, blinking, not quite sure what year it is, reaching for your surroundings as though they were floating objects you had to gather back. That confusion has a name: sleep inertia. And it is not a sign of weakness or excessive tiredness. It is the direct and predictable result of being dragged out of the deepest work the brain knows how to do. Because N3 is where the heavy maintenance happens, not the filing and gating of N2. Maintenance. The word is not a metaphor. It is, as we will come to see, almost embarrassingly literal. There is something that happens in deep sleep that most people do not know, and that surprises them when they first hear it, because it involves a kind of behavior that deep sleep is not usually associated with. Sleepwalking arises from N3, not from dreaming. Night terrors, too, the kind where a person sits upright with a hammering heart and wild eyes, arises from N3. Bedwetting in children, the same. This surprises people because the popular picture of these things involves the dreaming mind, some dark narrative or frantic story playing out while the body acts it through. But that is not what happens. What happens in these events is something subtler and stranger. The brain, still deeply in its slow-wave state, partially activates the motor system or the arousal system, or both, without ever fully returning to consciousness. The dreaming mind is nowhere in it. The dream is not the culprit. The deep sleep is where these things live. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, the body is receiving one of the most important signals of the night. The pituitary gland releases growth hormone in pulses throughout the day, but the largest pulse, the main event, comes during this first episode of deep sleep, early in the night. Growth hormone is not just for growing taller when you are young. In adults, it does the ongoing work of tissue repair, the rebuilding of muscle and bone, the maintenance of cell structures across the body. The day taxes the body. The first hour or two of deep sleep is a significant part of the answer. This is the window in which that repair bill gets paid. And the timing matters. It is the first episode of deep slow-wave sleep, early in the night, that triggers the biggest release. Sleep away the early hours, and you have shifted the schedule. The repair window slides, the signal weakens. And this is why the common picture of sleep as a kind of passive truce, a ceasefire between the demands of the day, misses something important. The body during N3 is, in its quiet way, working, systematically working, growth hormone moving through the blood, tissues responding, the slow delta waves rolling one after the other across the surface of a brain that is, by any measure of activity, far from idle. But there is something else happening in N3, something that was not understood for most of human history and that was not given its full name till 2012. And it is, I think, the most remarkable single thing the sleeping brain does. Let me tell you about the plumbing. The brain is unusual in the body in one specific way that matters here. Almost every other organ in the body has a lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is the body's network for draining away waste, clearing the metabolic byproducts that accumulate as cells do their work. Your heart, your lungs, your liver, your muscles, all of them have this drainage. The brain, sitting inside its bony case behind a specialized barrier that keeps most of the body's circulation at arm's length, does not have lymphatic vessels in the same way. Or so it was thought. In 2012, a neuroscientist at the University of Rochester named Maiken Nedergaard and her colleagues published a paper that changed that picture. What they found was a system previously overlooked in which cerebrospinal fluid, the clear liquid that bathes the brain and spinal cord, was being moved through the brain along channels that ran around blood vessels. The fluid came in along the space surrounding the arteries, moved through the brain tissue, and then drained out through channels beside the veins. It was a circulation within a circulation, a drainage system the brain had hidden inside its own plumbing all along. They called it the glymphatic system. The name is a combination. Glial, from the glial cells, the non-neuronal brain cells that support and maintain the neurons, and lymphatic, because the function is lymphatic in nature, a drainage and clearance system. The glial cells involved are called astrocytes, star-shaped cells that are scattered throughout the brain in enormous numbers, and the key to their role in the glymphatic system is a protein called aquaporin 4, a water channel that's studied along the surface of the astrocytes, regulating how fluid moved through them and into the spaces between cells. Aquaporin 4 is the hinge on which the whole system swings. Now here is where it connects to sleep, and the connection is striking. Nedergaard's team found that the glymphatic system was not running at the same pace all the time. It was dramatically, measurably more active during sleep, and specifically during the kind of sleep in which slow delta waves moved across the brain, during deep NREM sleep, during the stage we have just arrived at. The mechanism that seems to drive this involves the spaces between brain cells. The brain is not a solid mass. There is space between the cells, a kind of porous architecture, and that space is where the cerebrospinal fluid moves. During waking, those spaces are relatively narrow, but during deep sleep, in the mouse experiments in which this was first clearly shown, those spaces expanded by a substantial amount. The space between brain cells during sleep was roughly 60% larger than during wakefulness, and that widening was the opening of the channel. With 60% more room to move, the cerebrospinal fluid could flow through the tissue far more efficiently, carrying with it the metabolic waste that had built up while the brain was working. This was the landmark study published in Science in 2013 by Lulu Shi and colleagues in Nedergaard's lab. And what they found in the fluid being cleared was suggestive in a way that the sleep research community immediately understood. Among the things being washed out was amyloid beta, a protein whose abnormal accumulation in the brain is one of the defining features of Alzheimer's disease. Let that land for a moment. The brain, during deep sleep, opens its channels, lets a tide of fluid wash through, and among the things swept out is the protein that piles up in Alzheimer's, not as a side effect of some other process, apparently as a central part of what the glymphatic system is there to do. I want to be careful here because the science deserves care. The clearance of amyloid beta during sleep is well established. That is a Tier 1 finding, replicated, not seriously in doubt. What is more complicated and still actively being worked out is the causal chain. The question of whether poor sleep, sustained over years, actually causes or accelerates the development of Alzheimer's is not settled. The associations are real and the associations are troubling. People who consistently sleep poorly have higher rates of dementia. Sleep disruption appears in the early stages of Alzheimer's, sometimes before the cognitive symptoms. But association is not the same as causation, and the brain in Alzheimer's is a complicated place, with changes that may themselves disrupt sleep, making the relationship circular and hard to untangle. What we can say honestly is that there is a real mechanism, a real clearance system, and the clearance system runs best when you sleep. Whether skipping sleep over a lifetime meaningfully raises your risk of Alzheimer's is a question researchers are working hard to answer. The direction of the evidence is not reassuring. What we can also say is that even a single night without sleep does something measurable to the amyloid load in the living human brain. In 2018, a team led by Ehsan Shokri Kujori published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, using PET imaging to look at amyloid beta in people who had either slept normally or gone without sleep for a night. One sleepless night. The people who had stayed awake showed a measurable increase in amyloid beta in their brains. The clearance had slowed. The protein had accumulated more than it would have in the same period of normal sleep. This was not in mice. This was in living human beings, imaged with a scanner. It is a finding worth sitting with. You go to sleep. Your brain opens its channels, widens the spaces, lets the fluid move through. You skip a night. The channels are narrower, the flow is slower, and by morning the protein is measurably higher. Not dramatically higher, not catastrophically higher, but higher. The maintenance window was missed. The cleaning did not happen, and the difference shows up in the chemistry. Still, for all the power of this finding in mice, there was a gap. The glymphatic system had been characterized in animals. Could you actually see it at work in the human brain? Could you watch the fluid move? In 2019, a team that included Nina Fultz published a study in Science using functional MRI to image the sleeping human brain in a new way. What they were looking for was the movement of cerebrospinal fluid, and they found it: large, slow waves of cerebrospinal fluid pulsing into the brain during deep NREM sleep. Not a constant trickle, but a rhythm. The fluid moved in slow, synchronized pulses, and those pulses were not random. They were coupled to the electrical slow waves of deep sleep. First, the slow wave would pass across the brain's electrical activity, and then with a short delay, a wave of fluid would follow. And they were also coupled to changes in blood volume. As blood briefly dipped in the brain, a wave of cerebrospinal fluid moved in to fill the space. A coordinated wash. Slow wave, blood dip, fluid in. You could see it on a scanner. In a person, a sleeping person lying in a brain imager, with waves of cerebrospinal fluid moving through their brain in time with the deep sleep electrical rhythm. The brain's plumbing visible, running exactly when it was supposed to, doing exactly what the mouse data had said it would do. This is what Nedergaard found, and what Z's team made visible in animals, and what Fultz's team finally showed directly in a sleeping person. A system, a cleaning system, one that runs in the deep of the night, in the delta waves, in the stage you have just arrived at. Take a slow breath here. You are in N3 now. The delta waves are rolling. The spaces between your cells have widened. Somewhere, deep in the architecture of your brain, a slow and patient wash is underway. The cerebrospinal fluid is moving, guided by the aquaporin-4 channels on the star-shaped astrocytes, pulsing in rhythm with the slow electrical tide of your sleeping brain. Moving through corridors that narrow when you are awake and open when you are not. Carrying with it the metabolic residue of the day. The proteins that, left to accumulate, become the signature of the most feared of all brain diseases. And you are right now, if you are listening to this as you lie down, doing this. You have done it every night of your life. Most of the time we think of the night as the pause between the days, the gap, the downtime, a waiting room between one session and the next. But what Nedergaard found, what Z's team demonstrated, what Fultz's team imaged, is that the night has its own agenda, and the agenda is not passive. The night is when the cleaning crew comes in. The night is when the channels open and the tide moves through. The night is maintenance, literal and ongoing, and the maintenance has a schedule. And the schedule is keyed to the delta waves of deep sleep. There is something that I find quietly moving about this. Not alarming, moving. The idea that your brain, which has spent the day receiving information and making decisions and holding conversations and worrying about things it did not solve, has arranged for this, has arranged that in the deep of each night the walls step back, the fluid comes in, and the residue of all that work gets carried gently out, that the architecture of sleep includes a tide, that the tide knows when to come, that the slow waves are the signal. It is an old kind of order, older in fact than we are. The glymphatic system is not unique to humans. It has been found in a range of animals. And the imperative of sleep, which turns out to be also the imperative of this cleaning, runs through almost everything alive, but we will come to that. For now, let the deep sleep do its work, because there is something else that happens in this stage, something that will become important in a moment when we talk about what goes wrong when the cleaning fails. The brain, which we sometimes describe with a kind of casual modesty as the thing that thinks and feels, is also the most energy-hungry organ in the body by a significant margin. It weighs roughly 2% of total body mass. It consumes around 20% of the body's energy. That is a tenfold overrepresentation. A structure the size of a cantaloupe burning through a fifth of everything you eat. This is not a coincidence. The work of being a brain, the constant electrochemical activity, the maintenance of vast networks of connections, the ceaseless signaling, all of it produces metabolic waste as a byproduct, the way any working engine produces exhaust. And in the confined space of the skull behind the blood-brain barrier, that waste needs somewhere to go. The glymphatic system is where it goes, and deep sleep is when it goes there. This is the context in which the one sleepless night finding from Chokri Kajori's team becomes significant not as a curiosity, but as a demonstration of something real. Skip the maintenance. The waste accumulates, not infinitely, not irreversibly, from a single night, but measurably. The engine ran, the exhaust is there, the cleaning was not done, and the brain that cannot clear its own waste, over time, over years, over a lifetime of shortened nights and fragmented sleep, accumulates what the Alzheimer's brain is characterized by. The amyloid plaques, the tau tangles, the proteins that the glymphatic system, running in the delta waves of deep sleep, is specifically tasked with clearing. Again, the honest caveat, this does not mean that anyone who sleeps badly will get Alzheimer's. The disease is complex, the genetics are complex, the timeline is long and the research is ongoing, but the mechanism is real, the clearance system exists, it runs in your sleep. And when it does not run, the clearance slows. There is no way to know that and feel entirely neutral about your sleep. Before we move forward, let me say one more thing about N3 and about the kind of sleep it is. It is the stage most sensitive to the pressures of the week. If you have been cutting sleep short, if you have had a run of poor nights, the brain does not forget it. It keeps a record, and given the first opportunity for recovery, it will prioritize N3. The slow wave sleep comes back hard, comes back long, in a rebound that researchers have measured and documented. The brain knows what it missed. It makes up for deep sleep first before it makes up for REM, because deep sleep is, in the hierarchy of the night, the stage the brain treats as most urgent. That urgency is the brain speaking plainly about what it needs. Not every night is equal in what it restores, and the depth of the night, the delta wave floor of it, is the part that cannot be skimped without consequence. This is N3. The maintenance floor, the cleaning tide, the growth hormone pulse, the hardest place to wake from, and the one the brain returns to first when it has been denied. You will not stay here all night. The cycle has a rhythm, a 90-minute revolution, and eventually the deep gives way and the sleeper begins to rise. The delta waves thin. The brain's electrical activity picks up, and something entirely different, something the outside of the sleeper gives almost no sign of, begins to build. But before that, one more breath, one more moment here in the deep. The spaces are open, the fluid is moving, the proteins are being carried out. Somewhere in the pituitary gland, growth hormone is moving into the blood, finding the tissues that spent the day being used, beginning the patient work of repair. All of this is happening in a person who, to look at, seems to be simply still, breathing slowly, eyes closed, absent from the waking world. This is what the absence is for, and now it begins to change. The delta waves grow smaller. The rolling hills on the tracing flatten and quicken. The deep sleep loosens its hold, and the brain moves back toward the surface. Not all the way. Not yet. The sleeper does not wake. But something in the architecture of the night shifts. The first cycle of slow-wave sleep is ending, and what comes next is the stage that most people, if you ask them to draw sleep, would draw. Vivid, strange, often remembered. almost completely misunderstood. This is the stage where your eyes will move and your body will not. We are on our way to REM. And waiting there is the promised paralysis, the thing that your dreaming brain arranged specifically so that the dream stayed where it belongs. What happens when that arrangement fails, and what that failure can sometimes mean for the years ahead, is one of the most unexpectedly consequential stories in all of sleep science. But first, one last look back at the floor we are leaving, because it has done real work. Tonight, the channels are a little cleaner than they were. The tissue has received its signal. The brain has done in roughly 90 minutes of the night's first deep plunge what it cannot do in any waking hour. That is not a small thing. That is the point. And the cycle continues, rising now, the brain ascending through lighter NREM territory on its way to the first brief meeting with REM. The first one of the night is short, a few minutes maybe, barely a glimpse, but enough to begin what REM does. And over the course of the whole night, across the 4 to 6 cycles of this great slow revolution, the balance will shift. The deep sleep will take less of each cycle, the REM will take more. By the final cycle, the one that carries you toward morning, the REM period may last 30 minutes, 40, in some people closer to an hour. The dreams at that end of the night are the long ones, the complicated ones, the ones you wake from still vivid, still half inside them. There is a reason for that distribution. It is not arbitrary. The night is not a flat terrain of repeating identical loops. It is asymmetric on purpose, loaded differently at each end. What the brain needs most urgently at the start, the slow wave cleaning, and the growth hormone and the deep repair, it takes first and takes heavily. What it needs to do in REM, the work of emotion and memory and the strange theatre of the dreaming mind, it builds toward. Saves for the long end of the night. Saves for the part of the night closest to the morning you will wake into. This is the architecture. This is the design. And now the brain is rising and the eyes still are about to begin to move, and the body is about to do something remarkable, which is to lock itself entirely in place while the sleeping mind goes entirely elsewhere. What happens in that locked and dreaming state and what it is actually for, and what it costs you to miss it, is what waits just ahead. But first, the descent. Because before the night reaches its dreaming, it goes somewhere harder to reach, somewhere the waking mind can barely touch. And if you are asleep right now as this reaches you, if your eyelids have already grown heavy and the voice is starting to soften into the middle distance, some part of you is already heading there, into the deep. Take a slow breath. Let the body be heavy. The third stage of sleep has many names: slow wave sleep, deep sleep, N3 in the clinical notation. In the older system, researchers divided it into stages 3 and 4. The modern scoring merges them into a single territory, one country with one name. And the defining feature of that country is what the brain does electrically inside it. Delta waves, less than 4 cycles per second, high, wide, slow. If you were watching them on an EEG, they would look like great rolling hills rather than the quick, nervous chatter of a waking mind. The brain is not racing. It is not busy in the way it is busy when you are solving something or worrying about something or trying to remember where you left your keys. It is doing something else entirely, something slower and, in its way, far more essential. This is the hardest stage to wake someone from. If someone shook your shoulder right now, if a door slammed, if a phone lit up across the room, and you were deep in N3, you might not surface at all, or you might surface wrong, groggy, confused, unsure for a long moment of what year it is, what room you are in, who you are. Researchers call this sleep inertia, the grogginess of being pulled from the deepest water before the body is ready to leave it. It can last minutes, sometimes longer. It passes, but it is not nothing. The strange behaviors that people associate with sleep, the ones that look wakeful but are not sleepwalking, night terrors, bedwetting in children, those do not come from dreaming. They come from here, from N3, from the deep. The sleeping person who walks down the hall and stands in the kitchen and stares at nothing and then turns and walks back is not enacting a dream. They are in a state that is neither fully asleep nor fully awake, a kind of third thing emerging briefly from the delta deep and not quite making it to the surface. They will not remember it. There is nothing to remember. This is not the stage of stories and images. This is the stage of the body doing what only the body knows how to do. And one of those things is to release growth hormone. The largest pulse of growth hormone in any 24-hour period comes during the first deep sleep episode of the night. Not at any fixed clock hour. During the first time the brain sinks into N3, the endocrine system is watching for that depth, waiting for that signal, and when the slow waves begin, the pulse is released. Tissue repair, cellular maintenance, the reconstruction that cannot happen efficiently when the body is busy being awake and upright and asking things of itself. The night is, among other things, a repair shop. And deep sleep is when the shop opens. This is worth sitting with, not as information to file away, just as something to notice gently about this very night. Whatever the body is tending to, whatever small mending or rebuilding or clearing out needs doing, it is finding the hours to do it now. Let that thought settle. Take another slow breath. Because what comes next is the part that surprised everyone who discovered it. The part that changed what we think we know about what the sleeping brain is actually doing. The part that, if you have not heard it before, may make you pause and want to stay awake a little longer just to think about it, which would be, gently, the wrong response. But the impulse is understandable. In 2012, a researcher named Maiken Nedergaard and her team at the University of Rochester published a finding that rewrote the basic picture of how the brain takes care of itself. What they described was a system that had not been recognized before. Not fully, not in its scope. They called it the glymphatic system. The name is a compound. Glial cells, the support cells of the brain, and lymphatic, the body's waste clearing network. The glymphatic system is, in its simplest description, the brain's plumbing, and it runs at night. The brain is, by any measure, an extravagant organ. It is roughly 2% of your body's mass and consumes roughly 20% of its energy. Every hour of every waking day, the brain is burning through resources, running its signals, building and breaking and running again. And, as with any process that burns energy, there is waste. Metabolic byproducts, proteins that have been used and need to be cleared away before they accumulate. The body has the lymphatic system for the rest of it, the quiet highway of fluid that carries cellular debris away from the tissues. But the brain sits behind a barrier, the blood-brain barrier, that keeps most of the lymphatic system out. So the brain has its own version. Cerebrospinal fluid, the clear liquid that bathes the brain and spinal cord, flows along channels that run beside blood vessels through a network made possible by cells called astrocytes, supported by protein channels called aquaporin 4. The CSF moves in, carries waste out, and the system keeps the brain chemically clean. What Nedergaard's team found was that this system is not running at the same rate all day. In experiments with mice, the space between brain cells, the interstitial space, expanded by approximately 60% during sleep. 60. The cells themselves appeared to shrink slightly, opening up room, making room, so the cerebrospinal fluid could flow through more freely, reach more of the tissue, carry more of the waste away. The cleaning happens during sleep because sleep is when the brain physically opens itself to be cleaned. Among the things being cleared are amyloid beta and tau, two proteins. You may have heard their names in a different context because they are the proteins that accumulate in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. They build up, they aggregate, They form the plaques and tangles that are the hallmark of that condition. And one of the things the glymphatic system clears during sleep is them. This is where honesty is necessary, because the science here is real and important, but it is also still being worked out. The clearance is established. The glymphatic system does clear amyloid beta and tau during sleep. That part researchers are confident in. What is less settled, what is still actively studied and debated, is the precise shape of the causal chain between chronic sleep loss and Alzheimer's disease itself. The association is real and consistent. People who sleep poorly over long periods of their lives do show higher rates of the disease. But association is not causation. The brain of someone developing Alzheimer's may also sleep more poorly because of the disease, not only the other way around. The arrow may point in both directions, or the relationship may be more tangled than any clean line suggests. What can be said more directly is this. In 2018, a research team led by Ehsan Shokri Kujori published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They used PET imaging to look at the living human brain, and they found that a single night of total sleep deprivation raised the level of amyloid beta in the brain. One night. Measurably. In the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus especially, the areas most associated with thinking and memory. The cleaning had not happened, and the accumulation was visible by morning. One night. And then in 2019, a team led by Laura Fultz published a study in Science that added something almost difficult to picture without wanting to see the images yourself. Using fMRI, they watched CSF actually moving into the human brain during sleep. Slow, large waves of fluid pulsing in, coupled to the electrical slow waves of deep NREM sleep, coupled to dips in blood volume in the brain, as if the vascular system was making room, standing aside to let the cleaning fluid through. They were watching the glymphatic wash happen in real time, in a living person, in a machine. The tide coming in, and the waste going out with it. This is what deep sleep is doing, not just providing rest in the ordinary sense, not just keeping you still and quiet so the body can save energy. The brain is flooding its own tissues with cerebrospinal fluid and clearing out the proteins that, given enough years of imperfect clearance, may accumulate into something darker. Sleep is the maintenance window, and N3, the deep, is when most of that work gets done, and then the cleaning wind changes direction. After the depth of N3, the brain does not simply drift upward into waking, it does something stranger, something that, when researchers first caught it on paper in the early 1950s, they genuinely could not believe they were reading correctly. The brain comes back to life, not all the way back, not into the world of daylight and chairs and the ordinary hum of a room, but the electrical signature changes dramatically, and if you were watching the readout on an EEG machine, the slow, wide, rolling waves of deep sleep would suddenly give way to something that looks almost identical to the waking brain. Fast, jagged, desynchronized. The kind of activity you associate with someone sitting at a desk, solving a problem, or walking down a street, or having a conversation. The brain, in other words, appears to wake up, and yet the person does not wake up. Their eyes are closed, their body is still in the bed, and something remarkable is happening to both. Behind those closed eyelids, the eyes are moving, rapidly, darting, left and right, up and down in quick, jerky sweeps that are entirely different from the slow, rolling movements of lighter sleep. And as for the body, something is happening to it that is in many ways the most dramatic event of the entire night. Something the brain is doing deliberately, actively, by design. The body is being paralyzed, not through illness, not through injury, but through an active command from circuits deep in the brainstem. Neurons there fire and release inhibitory chemicals, primarily glycine and GABA, that travel down to the motor neurons in the spinal cord and suppress them. switch them off. The result is a condition called REM atonia, and it is nearly complete. The voluntary muscles of the body, the ones you use to move your arms, your legs, to turn over, to reach out, essentially stop responding. You are in bed and you cannot move. And in this state of orchestrated paralysis, the most vivid, most emotionally charged, most narratively elaborate dreaming of the entire night begins. This is REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And when two researchers named Eugene Asarinsky and Nathaniel Kleitman first identified it in 1953, they were so surprised by what they were seeing that they checked the equipment. They checked it again. They had subjects wake their sleeping participants to confirm that the eye movements were real. They were. The brain was active, the eyes were moving. And the subjects woken during these periods reported dreaming with a richness and consistency that stood apart from anything described when they were woken during quiet sleep. Something was happening, clearly and unmistakably, that had not been understood before. REM sleep had been there every night, for every human life, without anyone knowing quite what it was. Now think for a moment about the paralysis, because it is worth sitting with what an extraordinary piece of engineering this is. You are, in REM, experiencing something. The brain is generating a world, complete with motion and sensation and fear and joy, and other people who speak to you and places that feel absolutely real while you are in them. The motor cortex, the part of the brain that commands movement, is active. Studies have shown it firing in patterns that correspond to the actions happening in the dream. If you are dreaming of running, the motor patterns for running are present in the cortex. And the only thing standing between that neural command and your actual body getting up and running is a set of chemical inhibitors in the brainstem suppressing the signal before it can reach your muscles. That suppression is protecting you. It is protecting you from acting out whatever your dreaming brain believes is happening. And most of the time, every night of your life, it works without a flaw. You lie there, deeply asleep, experiencing a world your brain has constructed, and your body remains still and safe in the bed. But for some people, that switch fails. There is a condition called REM sleep behavior disorder, often abbreviated to RBD. In RBD, the atonia that should protect the sleeper is incomplete or absent. The inhibitory signal from the brainstem does not fully suppress the motor neurons, and the result is exactly what you might imagine. The person begins to physically enact their dreams. They shout, they swing their arms, they kick. They have been found to leap from the bed, to punch walls, to run across the room and crash into furniture, all while their eyes remain closed and they are, by every measure, still deeply asleep. Their partners have been injured. They themselves have been injured, sometimes significantly. What makes RBD more than a sleep disorder, what makes it a finding that reverberates far beyond the bedroom, is what it predicts. REM sleep behavior disorder has been identified as one of the strongest known early predictors of a class of neurological diseases called synucleinopathies. These are conditions defined by the abnormal accumulation of a protein called alpha-synuclein in the brain. Parkinson's disease is the most widely known of them, multiple system atrophy is another, Lewy body dementia is another. And the connection between RBD and these diseases is not casual or loosely statistical. Studies have found that the majority of people diagnosed with RBD will, over time, go on to develop one of these conditions. By some estimates, the conversion rate over a period of decades may be as high as 80 or 90%, which means that when a person begins to act out their dreams in sleep, when the paralysis that should keep them still starts to fail, it may be one of the earliest detectable signs that the neurons responsible for that paralysis are being damaged by a process that has been underway, silently, perhaps for years, before any waking symptom appears. The dreaming brain is already losing part of its architecture. The failure of the sleep switch is not the cause. It is a signal. Sleep, again and again through this night we are walking together, turns out to carry information. The way it works, the way it fails, the very presence or absence of its stages, each carries something that medicine is only now learning to read properly. But let us set aside the failure and return to the normal, because in normal REM sleep, in a brain where the atonia is working and the dreamer is safely still, something enormously valuable is being done. The question of what REM sleep is for has occupied sleep researchers for decades, and the honest answer is that it is still being worked out. But what has emerged from careful experimental work is a picture of REM as something like the brain's emotional archive and skill integration workshop, running through the night while the rest of you is quiet. Start with emotion. There is compelling evidence that REM sleep plays a central role in emotional regulation, not just in how you feel the next morning, though that is real and most people have experienced it, that quality of rawness or fragility that follows a bad night, or the calmer, more settled feeling after a good one. But at a deeper level. The amygdala, the region of the brain most associated with the processing of fear and threat, is unusually active during REM sleep. And there is a hypothesis associated in large part with the neuroscientist Matthew Walker, among others, that during REM the brain reruns emotionally significant memories, but does so in a neurochemical environment notably different from wakefulness. The levels of norepinephrine, a stress-linked chemical, are reduced during REM, almost absent in fact. The suggestion is that the brain is able to revisit difficult or frightening experiences with the emotional charge somewhat dampened, processing the content of what happened without being flooded again by the full neurological force of the original fear. The memory is replayed, but the alarm is turned down. Whether this serves as something like an overnight therapy for difficult experience is still being actively researched. The evidence is suggestive and the mechanism is plausible, but the full picture is not yet settled in the way that some popularizations have implied. What can be said with more confidence is that selective deprivation of REM sleep, achieved experimentally by waking subjects each time their brain enters REM while allowing other stages to continue, measurably impairs emotional processing. People who have been selectively REM deprived are worse at reading emotional expressions in faces. Their reactivity to threatening material increases. The emotional tone of the next day is harder to navigate. Something is being done in REM that the waking brain cannot simply catch up on later, and its absence is felt. REM also plays a particular role in the consolidation of procedural memory. Procedural memory is the kind of knowing that lives in the body more than the mind, the skill that you cannot entirely explain but that your hands or your fingers or your feet know how to do. Playing an instrument, typing, a particular sequence of movements in a sport. The evidence from sleep research suggests that the consolidation of these motor skills is especially tied to the sleep that follows learning, and specifically to the REM and N2 stages of that sleep. If you are trying to learn something physical, something that requires your nervous system to wire a sequence of actions into a reliable and fluent pattern, the night you sleep after practicing matters as much as the practice itself. This has been demonstrated in experiments where subjects learn a motor task, a finger tapping sequence for example, and are then either allowed to sleep normally or kept awake. Those who sleep show significantly greater improvement when tested the next day. And when the specific stages of sleep are analyzed, the density of sleep spindles in N2 and the amount of REM sleep correlate with the degree of improvement. The brain is not simply consolidating a memory of having done the task. It is, in some sense, practicing the task again internally, running the neural patterns in the absence of the body's actual movement, polishing the sequence until it is smoother. You practice while you sleep. Your sleeping brain finishes what your waking body started. Now hold that thought alongside something about who spends the most time in REM, because the distribution of REM across a human life says something important about what it is doing, Newborns, infants in the earliest weeks and months of life spend roughly half of their total sleep time in REM. Half. In raw hours, that can mean something close to 8 hours of REM sleep in a single day. Adults, by comparison, spend roughly 20 to 25% of their sleep in REM, and across the span of a life, that proportion gradually shifts as the brain matures and develops. The infant brain is doing something in all that REM that the adult brain no longer needs to do at quite the same intensity or volume. What is it doing? The leading hypothesis is that REM sleep in infants is intimately involved in the construction of the brain itself. The brain of a newborn is, relative to the brain it will eventually become, remarkably unfinished. The vast network of connections between neurons, the wiring that makes thought and perception and emotion and movement possible, is still being laid down in those early months and years. And the leading thinking among sleep researchers is that REM sleep provides a kind of endogenous stimulation, a self-generated neural activity that helps to drive and shape that process. The brainstem circuits that generate REM activity are among the most ancient and earliest to mature. And the hypothesis is that by activating the developing cortex with patterns of neural firing even before the senses are fully online, REM sleep is helping to wire the brain from the inside. The brain is building itself, and it does a significant portion of that building while it sleeps. Think of what that means. In the most concrete terms available, every time an infant sleeps, which is most of the time in those earliest weeks, something structural is happening. Connections are being formed, patterns are being established. The architecture of a mind, the physical substrate that will eventually support language, recognition, memory, emotion, all of it, is being assembled during those long, heavy hours of sleep that parents sometimes desperately wish would last a little longer. Sleep for an infant is not a pause in development. Sleep is development. And then there is one more thing about REM that is easy to overlook, but that has an almost poetic quality to it when you pause to consider it. During REM sleep, the brain switches off one of the most fundamental regulatory systems of the body. Thermoregulation stops. In NREM sleep, across N1 and N2 and even in the deep of N3, your body continues to monitor and maintain its temperature. If you are too warm, the mechanisms that cool you, sweating, vasodilation, begin to operate. If you are too cold, you shiver. The system runs continuously, holding your core temperature within its narrow, acceptable range. It is automatic, constant, largely invisible to consciousness, but it is working. In REM, it stops. The brain relinquishes control of body temperature. You stop shivering, you stop sweating to regulate heat. You become, in the language of biology, temporarily poikilothermic, meaning your body temperature begins to drift toward whatever the temperature of your environment happens to be. If the room is cold, you begin to grow cold. If it is warm, you grow warm. You become, in this one narrow physiological sense, more like a reptile than a mammal. The great thermostat of the mammalian body goes quiet, and for the duration of your dreaming you float, thermally unmoored, in whatever temperature the night has provided. This is why the temperature of your sleeping environment matters more than it might seem. During NREM, your body can compensate for a room that is slightly too warm or slightly too cool. During REM, it cannot. The dream has the room. And on that note, let us step back from REM for a moment and look at the whole night, because there is a larger story being told across all the stages together. A story about what sleep is doing to memory and to the brain's fundamental capacity to learn. That is more than the sum of any single stage. By now you understand the structure. The night cycles. Each cycle runs roughly 90 minutes. In the early cycles, the ones that fill the first third or so of the night, the descent into N3 is deep and long. The slow waves roll through the cortex. The glymphatic tide is most active, and growth hormone is released in its largest pulse of the day. Then the cycle rises, passes through lighter sleep, and the first REM period appears. It is brief, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes. Then the cycle begins again, but something shifts as the night progresses. In the middle cycles, the time spent in N3 begins to shorten. The architecture of each cycle tilts, and by the later cycles, the ones that fill the last third of the night, just before the ordinary hour of waking, the N3 periods have become very brief or have disappeared almost entirely. The deep wave sleep has done what it needed to do in the first half of the night. And into the space it vacates, REM expands. Those final cycles can contain REM periods that last 30, 40, sometimes 60 minutes. Long, elaborate, vivid, the kind of dreaming you remember because you are woken from it by an alarm or by morning light rather than by a natural transition. The night is not a uniform loop. It is a journey with a shape. Deep in the beginning, dreaming at the end. Both are essential. Both are doing different things. And the timing of each, early versus late, is part of the design. Now consider what this means for memory specifically, because the research on sleep and memory is one of the areas where the evidence is clearest and the implications most striking. When you learn something new during the day, whether a fact, a name, a face, a piece of music, a motor sequence, that new information is initially held in the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a structure deep in the brain, seahorse-shaped, sitting roughly at the center of both hemispheres, and it functions something like a temporary holding tank. New experiences are captured there, relatively intact, relatively quickly. The hippocampus is good at this. It can take in new information rapidly and hold it, but it is not where you want information to live permanently. The hippocampus is limited in its storage capacity, and it is vulnerable. Damage to the hippocampus famously disrupts the ability to form new, long-term memories, as in the case of the patient known as HM, who, after surgery that removed his hippocampi, could no longer store new experiences beyond a few seconds, even though his older memories, the ones formed before the surgery, remained largely intact. The hippocampus is for holding the new. Long-term memory lives elsewhere. It lives in the neocortex, the vast, wrinkled outer layer of the brain, the sheet of cortex that folds into all those ridges and valleys to fit inside the skull. Here, distributed across different regions depending on the type of information, long-term memories are stored. And the transfer of a new memory from the temporary holding tank of the hippocampus to the more stable archives of the neocortex is a process that depends, in significant part, on sleep. During slow-wave sleep, the N3 deep sleep, the hippocampus replays the day's experiences. Not consciously, you are not aware of it. But the neural patterns that were activated during learning, the specific sequences of firing that encoded a particular piece of information, are reactivated, replayed. And as they are replayed, the neocortex, which has been receiving a quieter version of these patterns all along, begins to consolidate them. The transfer is happening. What was held loosely in the hippocampus is being written more firmly into the cortex. This is why a night of sleep after learning is not optional if you want to remember what you learned. It is not simply that sleep prevents forgetting. Sleep is the active process by which recent experience becomes lasting memory. The encoding happens in the waking hours, the consolidation happens while you sleep. The two are partners, and the different stages of sleep serve different aspects of this partnership. The slow-wave sleep of N3 with its hippocampal replay and its large slow waves rolling across the cortex is particularly important for what researchers call declarative memory or explicit memory. This is the kind of memory you can put into words, the kind that responds to the question of what you know, facts, events, names, the vocabulary list you studied, the details of the story you read, the date you need to remember. These form preferentially during slow-wave sleep. REM sleep and the dense sleep spindles of N2 are more closely tied to procedural and emotional memory. The skills, the sequences, the emotional weight of experience, the feeling tone of what happened, not just the factual record of it. But this is the work being done in the back half of the night, in those long REM periods that stretch toward morning. So if you cut your night short, if you set the alarm early and lose those final hours, you are disproportionately cutting the REM. The slow-wave consolidation of facts may be relatively protected, happening early, as it does, but the emotional processing, the skill refinement, the procedural integration, these are exactly what you are losing. The back of the night is not optional rest you can afford to trade. It is a specific kind of work, and it is work that cannot be made up simply by sleeping longer on another night. Any more than skipping a specific surgery can be compensated for by performing a different one later. And beneath all of this, beneath the consolidation and the emotional processing and the procedural refinement, there is one more idea about what sleep does to the brain that is worth spending a quiet moment with. It is called the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, and it was proposed by two neuroscientists, Giulio Tononi and Chiara Cirelli. Here is the puzzle it begins from. Learning strengthens synapses. A synapse is the tiny gap across which one neuron communicates with another, and when neurons fire together repeatedly, in the patterns associated with learning a new thing, the connections between them are physically strengthened. The synapses become more sensitive, more efficient, more reliable. This is the cellular foundation of memory. This is what it means at the level of neurons to have learned something. But there is a problem. You cannot keep strengthening indefinitely. Synapses cost energy to maintain and to operate. If every experience of the day is strengthening connections throughout the brain, then by the time you reach the evening, the brain is running at a higher and higher baseline level of activity just to sustain all those strengthened connections. The signal-to-noise ratio degrades. Every neuron is talking loudly because all its connections have been turned up. The brain becomes saturated. It becomes harder to distinguish the important signals from the background, the meaningful pattern from the general noise. Tononi and Cirelli proposed that sleep, and specifically slow-wave sleep, is the mechanism by which the brain rescales. During the deep, the large, slow waves that roll across the cortex during N3 serve to downscale synaptic strength across the board, not eliminate the memories, not erase what was learned, but reduce the baseline, bring the overall level of synaptic activity back down to a range where new learning is possible again, where signals can be distinguished from noise, where the brain can wake up in the morning ready to begin taking in new information. Sleep, in this view, is not just consolidation, it is also renewal. It is the nightly reset that prevents the brain from drowning in its own accumulated learning. The price of plasticity, of the brain's remarkable ability to change and adapt and learn, is that the brain must periodically be brought back to a baseline from which it can continue to change, and sleep is when that happens. Think of it this way. Imagine you are trying to hear a particular voice in a crowded room where everyone is speaking at the same volume. It is very difficult. Now imagine that someone turns down the volume on every voice in the room equally, and from that quieter baseline, the voice you are listening for becomes distinguishable again. Sleep turns down the volume, not to silence, but to a level at which listening is possible. And the brain that needs this nightly reset is a remarkable piece of machinery by any measure. Though it makes up only about 2% of the body's total weight, the brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's total energy. 1/5 of everything your metabolism produces deployed to run a structure that would fit in your cupped hands. The energy demand is continuous, unrelenting, producing metabolic waste as a constant byproduct of all that activity. And the nightly maintenance window, the sleep that you and every creature capable of it needs, is in part the scheduled servicing of an engine that never truly stops but can only be fully cleaned when it is not also trying to navigate the world. The glymphatic system flushes waste during the deep. The hippocampus replays and transfers. The synapses are rescaled to a learnable baseline. Growth hormone rebuilds tissue. REM processes emotion and integrates skill. And all of this happens in the hours when you are, to all outward appearances, simply lying still with your eyes closed. The stillness is the most productive thing you do. There is something quietly wonderful in that, something worth holding for a moment before we move forward. The culture that surrounds wakefulness, the one that celebrates the long day and the early rise and the pride of needing less sleep than most, has it almost exactly backward. The achievement is not the extra hour of wakefulness. The achievement is the sleep. The maintenance is the work. The stillness is where the brain files what it knows, repairs what is damaged, clears what should not accumulate, and prepares itself to meet another day with something approaching its full capacity. You did not earn the rest last night. The rest earned everything you were able to do today. And as the night continues to move through its cycles, as the deep gives way again to lighter sleep and lighter sleep rises into another long, dreaming REM, something else is happening in parallel. Something older than any of the stages we have described, older than the hippocampus and its replaying, older than the glymphatic system and its tidal flush. A system that does not begin with sleep at all, but that makes sleep possible. A clock, an ancient internal clock ticking inside almost every cell of your body that has been keeping time since long before you were born and will keep it until the night you do not wake. We have spent this night with what sleep does while it is happening. Now let us turn to what sets the conditions for it to happen at all. There is a tiny cluster of cells sitting roughly at the center of your head, just above the point where the optic nerves cross on their way from the eyes to the back of the brain. It contains somewhere around 20,000 neurons. That is not many by brain standards. The visual cortex has hundreds of millions. The cerebellum has tens of billions. This little knot of cells would be easy to dismiss as unremarkable, except for what it does. It is your master clock. It is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a Latin way of saying above the crossing of the optic nerves, which is simply a description of where it sits. The name is not the point. What it does is the point. It maintains a rhythm. It beats out a cycle of roughly 24 hours, day after day, year after year, with a precision that would be remarkable in any mechanism and is extraordinary in living tissue. And it synchronizes that rhythm to the one signal it trusts above all others: light. Every morning, when photons enter your eyes and land on specialized cells in the retina, a message travels directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Not a message that says, "Look, there is a tree," or "The light is blue this morning." A message that says simply, "It is day." The clock notes it. It adjusts. It sends instructions out across the body, and those instructions cascade into hormones and temperatures and alert levels, and the readiness of your immune system, and the timing of your hunger, and the pressure of your sleep drive. The master clock does not just keep time, it coordinates the entire biological enterprise of being alive. And the way it communicates the approach of night is through a small gland nestled near the center of the brain, the pineal gland. Shaped like a pine cone, which is how it got its name. In the evenings, as light fades, the pineal gland begins to release melatonin into the bloodstream. This is worth saying carefully because melatonin is widely misunderstood. Melatonin is not a sleeping drug. It is not a sedative. It does not push you toward unconsciousness the way that a glass of wine does, or the way that certain medications do. What melatonin does is tell your body that it is night. It is a darkness signal, a broadcast, a quiet announcement sent through the blood to every cell in the body saying the sun has gone, the night has begun, adjust accordingly. And one of the adjustments that follows from that announcement is a growing readiness to sleep. But the melatonin didn't put you to sleep. It told you the night had arrived, and your body drew the natural conclusion. Light suppresses melatonin. That is why spending the late evening in bright artificial light or staring at the blue shifted glow of a screen can confuse the system. The pineal gland is receiving a signal that says day is still happening. The darkness announcement is delayed. The readiness to sleep shifts later. You stay up later, you feel tired later, and then the alarm arrives at the same time it always does, and you wonder why the morning feels like it costs so much. It costs so much because your clock was told the night started late and it adjusted accordingly. Now, how does the clock tick? What is it at the deepest level? The answer came slowly, and it came from tiny creatures, from fruit flies primarily, and from the long, patient work of scientists who spent decades looking at behavior and genetics in organisms that most people would not think of as a window into human biology. But the clock turned out to be ancient, far older than humans, far older than fruit flies even. The same basic mechanism, the same molecular gear train runs in fungi, in algae, in bacteria. It predates the appearance of complex animals by what may be more than 1 billion years. The light-dark cycle of the Earth is that old, and life adapted to it almost as soon as it appeared. The molecular clock works like this. There are genes, named with abbreviations that are worth knowing because they are part of the fabric of how biology talks about time. Clock and BMAL1 are the drivers. They produce proteins that, when they accumulate to a sufficient level, travel back into the nucleus and switch off the genes that made them. The proteins then gradually degrade. The genes switch on again. More proteins are made. The cycle repeats. And because the production and degradation of these proteins takes a predictable amount of time, the cycle runs at a predictable length, close to 24 hours. The players that do the switching off are the proteins made by genes called PR and CRI, period and cryptochrome. PR and CRI accumulate, they shut down clock and BMAL1, they degrade, and then clock and BMAL1 rise again, around and around. A feedback loop so precise that it runs in isolated cells in a dish with no light cue at all, ticking away at close to its natural period because the mechanism is built in. In 2017, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young for working out exactly how this molecular clock operates. The prize went to the fruit fly work, to the painstaking mapping of those genes and proteins, because what they found in the fly turned out to be essentially what runs in you. The same genes, the same feedback logic, the same ancient gear train. It was one of those moments in science when the bridge between a small organism and a human being turns out to be almost no bridge at all. The mechanism was already there, in the common ancestor, waiting. There is one more thing about the clock that is worth sitting with. If you were to live in complete isolation, with no light cues, no clocks, no way to know what time of day it was outside, your internal clock would not run on exactly 24 hours. It would drift. The average human clock, free running in darkness, runs at roughly 24.2 hours, a little long, which means that without light to reset it each morning, you would naturally tend to go to bed a little later each night and wake a little later each morning, drifting slowly around the clock. This is why eastward jet lag is harder than westward. Flying west, you are lengthening your day, which is close to what your clock already wants to do. Flying east, you are shortening it, asking your clock to do something it resists. Your body knows the direction of ease. It is tuned very slightly toward the longer day. But the clock is only part of what governs sleep. There is a second process running alongside it, and the two together create the push and pull that brings you to your bed each night. The second process is simpler in a way, more mechanical. It is driven by a single molecule called adenosine. Adenosine is a byproduct. Your brain burns energy constantly, even at rest, even in sleep. And as it burns, it produces adenosine, which accumulates in the fluid between brain cells. The longer you are awake, the more adenosine piles up. And adenosine binds to receptors on neurons, and when it does, it creates a pressure, a heaviness. What you experience as the feeling of needing sleep is in part the adenosine load pressing on your brain. Sleep clears it. While you sleep, adenosine is broken down and removed. And when you wake in the morning after a full night, the pressure is low. The heaviness is gone. That is part of what morning freshness is. The adenosine has been cleared. This homeostatic sleep pressure is called process S in the formal framework. And the circadian clock, which determines when your body expects and promotes sleep, regardless of how much adenosine is present, is called process C. Together they are the two-process model first described by Alexander Bohr-Bailey in 1982, two independent systems, one building pressure from the first moment of waking, one running its ancient molecular rhythm. They interact, they reinforce each other, and when they align, they make sleep feel almost irresistible. Now, here is where caffeine enters the story, and here is where the story is not quite what most people think. Caffeine does not give you energy. What caffeine does is block adenosine receptors. It is shaped at the molecular level in a way that allows it to fit into the same receptor docks that adenosine would occupy. It sits there and does nothing, but by sitting there, it prevents the adenosine from binding. The pressure signal cannot get through, the heaviness lifts or fails to arrive, and you feel alert. But the adenosine is still there. It is still accumulating. It is simply being prevented from delivering its message. When the caffeine eventually leaves those receptors, when it is metabolized and clears the system, the adenosine that has been piling up behind the blockade rushes in all at once. This is the crash. The tiredness that arrives after the coffee wears off is not a new tiredness. It is the tiredness that was already there, waiting. Caffeine does not create wakefulness, it borrows it, and it borrows it from your future self, who will have to repay it in the currency of sleep. This is not an argument against coffee, it is simply an account of what is actually happening. The feeling of alertness is real. The mechanism is not what the feeling suggests. Now let us pull back from the mechanisms for a moment and think about something older. Why does any of this exist at all? Sleep is, on its face, a strange and costly thing. When you sleep, you are not feeding, you are not reproducing, you are not watching for predators, you are lying still and largely unresponsive to the world. For a wild animal, that is an enormous vulnerability. Every hour of sleep is an hour of exposure, of risk, of suspended vigilance. Evolution does not tend to preserve behaviors that are merely comfortable. It preserves behaviors that are necessary. So if sleep persists across every animal lineage, across hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary pressure, it must be doing something that cannot be skipped, something so essential that the cost of vulnerability is worth paying every single night. And it is not just mammals that sleep, it is not even just vertebrates. Dolphins sleep, or rather, they do something that looks like sleep and serves a similar function, though they cannot afford the full surrender that a land animal can. A dolphin has to keep swimming at least a little, or it will sink. It has to keep surfacing, or it will drown. It cannot simply lie down and lose consciousness. So what the dolphin brain does is extraordinary. It shuts down one hemisphere at a time. One half of the brain enters slow-wave sleep with the large delta waves characteristic of deep sleep, while the other half stays awake and keeps the body moving and breathing. Then, after a time, they switch. The sleeping half wakes and the waking half sleeps. Unihemispheric, slow-wave sleep. Half a brain resting while half a brain carries on. Whales do the same thing, and birds, in certain circumstances, can do it too. There is an image from a study of mallard ducks that is worth holding. A row of ducks sleeping along a branch. The ones in the middle of the row, safe on both sides, sleep with both hemispheres, but the ducks at the ends of the row, the ones facing outward toward potential predators, keep the eye on the outward side open, and the eye open means the brain hemisphere connected to that eye is awake, watching. These ducks are sleeping with half a brain and standing guard with the other half, and the choice of which half sleeps depends on where they are sitting in the row. The brain is solving a problem. The problem is that sleep is necessary, but wakefulness is also sometimes necessary, and so the brain finds a way to provide both at once. It does not do this because anyone decided it would. It does this because the animals that found a way to do it survived, and the ones that could not were more vulnerable. And over millions of years, the half-brain sleep became the standard equipment for animals in certain situations. And then there is the jellyfish. Cassiopeia is a jellyfish. It lives upside down on the seafloor, pulsing gently. It has no brain, no neurons organized into anything that resembles a central nervous system. And yet in 2017, researchers at Caltech showed that Cassiopeia shows sleep-like states. At night, it pulses more slowly. It is less responsive to stimuli. It takes longer to react. If the researchers disrupted its rest, it showed something like a recovery response afterward, a rebound, which is one of the hallmarks of sleep. If you wake a sleeping person, they tend toward deeper sleep in the subsequent period. Cassiopeia, without a single neuron that could be called a brain, does something analogous. What this means is that sleep did not begin with the brain. Whatever sleep is, whatever it fundamentally does, it predates the brain by what may be an enormous stretch of time. The roundworm Caenorhabditis elegans sleeps. It has exactly 302 neurons, which is close enough to nothing that we know every one of them by name and have mapped every connection. It still has a period of quiescence that shows all the functional signatures of sleep. The fruit fly, Drosophila, sleeps. And it was in the fruit fly that the molecular clock mechanism was worked out. Sleep is in the fly. Sleep is in the worm. Sleep is in a jellyfish that has no brain. Sleep is older than the brain itself. It is older than consciousness, older than dreaming, older perhaps than the distinction between night and day having any neural significance at all. It is a fundamental biological process, as basic as metabolism, as ancient as the rotation of the Earth. That is not a metaphor. That is what the evidence says, and if that is true, then what follows from it is simple. You cannot reason your way out of needing sleep. You cannot decide through force of will or clever scheduling that you are the exception. The requirement is older than your brain's ability to construct arguments about it. It is not cultural. It is not a recommendation. It is a condition of being alive, which brings us to what happens when that condition is not met. The deprivation evidence is not pleasant, and I want to walk through it carefully because the culture of insufficient sleep has made many people believe that their tolerance for it is higher than it actually is. It is not. The data on this is among the clearest in sleep research. Start with the short scale. 17 to 19 hours of continuous wakefulness is enough to impair your cognitive performance and reaction time to a degree comparable to a blood alcohol level of around 0.05%, which is at or above the legal driving limit in many countries. You have not had a single drink. You are simply awake past midnight, which billions of people do routinely. And yet your reactions, your judgment, your ability to track a moving object and respond to unexpected events are impaired to an extent that the law recognizes when alcohol is the cause as too dangerous to drive. This is not a subtle effect. This is measurable, consistent, replicated. The brain running on extended wakefulness is not the same brain as the brain that has slept. The errors accumulate in the reaction time data. The lapses appear in the vigilance tests. The processing slows. You may not feel it because the subjective sense of impairment is itself impaired. you are not a reliable reporter of your own deficit. This is one of the cruelest features of sleep deprivation. It degrades your ability to assess how degraded you are. Now extend the deprivation out to weeks, not total deprivation, but restriction. 6 hours a night for 2 weeks. That sounds manageable. Many people live at something close to that, especially during demanding stretches of work or parenting or illness. What the research shows is that after 2 weeks of 6 hours a night, performance levels drop to approximately what would be seen after complete sleep deprivation, total sleeplessness for a day or two. The impairment is that severe. And crucially, the subjects in these studies subjectively feel only mildly impaired. They report feeling a little tired, not devastated, not incapable, not dangerously impaired. But they are. The tests show it. The reaction times show it. The working memory shows it. The subjective feeling and the objective performance have split apart, and the subjective feeling is wrong. You are a poor judge of your own sleep deficit. This is true at 6 hours a night, and it is true at 7. The deficit accumulates quietly below the threshold of your notice and presents the bill in your performance, your mood, your health, and the accumulated risk to the person in the next lane who is hoping you are paying full attention. And then there is the far end of the deprivation spectrum, the place where the requirement becomes, in the most literal possible sense, a matter of life and death. Fatal familial insomnia is a disease, a real disease, not a metaphor. It is caused by a prion, a misfolded protein that corrupts other proteins by contact, in the same family of mechanisms that includes Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. In fatal familial insomnia, the prion damage accumulates in a specific region of the thalamus, a region critical to the gating of sleep. And as it accumulates, the patient progressively loses the ability to sleep. Not the ability to stay asleep or to reach deep sleep, but eventually any sleep at all. The capacity for sleep is destroyed from within, and without sleep, the body fails. Not in a single dramatic collapse, but progressively. The temperature regulation goes wrong, the autonomic nervous system loses its balance, hallucinations arrive, and then dementia, and then death. The disease is rare, it is hereditary, caused by a mutation in the prion protein gene. But it is unambiguous in what it demonstrates. Complete, chronic sleeplessness is lethal in humans, not eventually, not theoretically. The disease runs its course in months to years, and it ends in death, and the mechanism is the sleep that could not happen. In laboratory settings with rats, the same lesson was demonstrated by Alan Rechtschaffen and his colleagues. Rats deprived of all sleep by a carefully designed apparatus, a rotating disc over water that prevented them from entering sleep without entering the water, died within approximately 2 to 3 weeks. Their bodies showed a distinctive syndrome. Despite eating more than control animals, they lost weight. Their temperature regulation failed, their fur deteriorated, their immune systems collapsed. In roughly 2 to 3 weeks of total sleep deprivation, without any other intervention, the rats died. Sleep had not simply been removed, something essential had been removed with it, something their bodies could not supply through any other means. Then there is the human record. Randy Gardner, in 1964, was a high school student in San Diego who decided, as a science fair project, to stay awake for as long as possible. He was monitored by researchers, including the sleep scientist William Dement, and he managed 264 hours of sustained wakefulness. 11 days. He suffered hallucinations. His mood became erratic. His short-term memory failed in ways that were apparent to everyone around him. He had difficulty with concentration and coordination. He showed signs of paranoia. And yet he did not die, and when he finally slept, he recovered. His brain proved resilient enough, young enough, to absorb that particular assault without permanent documented damage. But the Guinness World Records, which had tracked sleep deprivation records, later stopped doing so. They recognized the attempts as dangerous. The record stands not as an achievement to admire, but as evidence of what extended sleep deprivation looks like in a human being and what the subsequent recovery demands. The costs of insufficient sleep extend well beyond cognition and safety. They run through the body's systems in ways that compound over time. Consider the immune system. Sleep is not separate from immune function. Sleep is part of how the immune system works. During sleep, certain immune responses are heightened. Inflammatory molecules are regulated. The activity of cells that patrol the body for infections is modulated by sleep. When that modulation is disrupted, the consequences are measurable. Researchers studying vaccination responses found that people who slept poorly in the days before and after receiving a vaccine mounted weaker antibody responses than people who slept well. The vaccine worked less effectively in the sleep-deprived. Their immune systems generated fewer of the antibodies that vaccines are designed to produce. Sleep was not incidental to the vaccine's efficacy. It was part of the machinery through which the vaccine worked. And for something more immediate than vaccines, consider the common cold. Research by Arik Prather and colleagues showed that people who reported sleeping 6 hours a night or less were substantially more likely to get sick when exposed to a cold virus than people who slept 7 hours or more. The relationship was dose-dependent. The less sleep, the more vulnerable. The immune surveillance that should catch the virus before it takes hold is undermined by the sleep deficit. Your immune system goes to work while you sleep, not metaphorically. The molecules, the cells, the signaling pathways all operate differently during sleep than during wakefulness. The maintenance is not only in the brain. And then there are the metabolic consequences, which are perhaps the most surprising to people who think of sleep as a passive state irrelevant to appetite and weight and blood sugar. Two hormones are particularly relevant here: leptin and ghrelin. Leptin is produced by fat tissue and signals to the brain that you are full, that you have enough energy stored, that hunger can subside. Ghrelin is produced in the stomach and does the opposite. It signals hunger. It says, eat. When you are sleep-deprived, leptin levels fall and ghrelin levels rise. The fullness signal weakens. The hunger signal strengthens. You become more hungry, and you become hungry for specific things, the high-calorie, high-carbohydrate foods that the ghrelin-driven hunger is particularly associated with. You eat more, and your body, simultaneously, is handling the resulting blood sugar less efficiently because the metabolic disruption of sleep loss extends to insulin sensitivity as well. Chronic short sleep is associated in large population studies with higher rates of weight gain, obesity, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. These are associations, and associations are not the same as proof of direct causation, but the hormonal mechanisms are there, measured in controlled conditions. The leptin and ghrelin dysregulation is real. The impaired insulin sensitivity is real. The pathways by which insufficient sleep could contribute to metabolic disease are not hypothetical. They are documented. Sleep loss is not just a cognitive problem, it is a whole-body problem, and the body keeps the account. Now let us bring the night to its close. You have traveled a long way in the hours since you lay down. You sank through the thin edge of N1 where the falling sensation took you briefly, where the face of someone you cannot quite name floated at the edge of your awareness. You settled into the deep machinery of N2, the spindles gating out the sound of the passing cars, the K-complexes marking the dark quiet. You descended into the delta waves of slow-wave sleep, where the largest wave of growth hormone you will produce today was released, where the glymphatic channels opened and the cerebrospinal fluid moved through the spaces between cells that had expanded to receive it, carrying away the amyloid beta and the tau that had accumulated through the hours of waking thought. You rose into REM, where your body was held still by the brainstem's careful paralysis and your eyes moved behind closed lids, and your dreaming brain ran its emotional filing, its consolidation of skill, its processing of what the day had cost you. And then the cycle turned and you descended again and rose again, and the night moved through its asymmetric arc, the deep weighted toward the early hours, the long dreaming periods saved for the approach of morning. Your hippocampus replayed the events of the day, pulling the temporary records it had held since morning and moving them toward the slower, more permanent storage of the neocortex. Your synapses were gently downscaled, their signals pruned back from the saturation of the day's learning to the baseline that allows tomorrow's learning to mean something. Your immune system ran its night protocols. Your temperature dipped and the bed held you and the clock ticked on. And running through all of it, older than any of it, older than the stages of sleep themselves and older than the brain that now enacts them, the molecular clock turned its gears. Purr and cry accumulated and shut down clock and BMAL1, which degraded, which allowed clock and BMAL1 to rise again, which made more PR and cry, which shut them down again. 24 hours. Again and again since you were a single cell dividing, and in the ancestors of that cell back through time to the ocean, back through time to before, there were creatures complex enough to have problems. The roundworm with its 302 neurons sleeps. The fly that showed us the molecular clock sleeps. The jellyfish with no brain at all drifts into its quieter, slower pulsing. The duck at the end of the row keeps one eye open and rests the other half of itself. The dolphin lets one hemisphere go dark while the other navigates the water. And you, with your 100 billion neurons and your layered cortex and your capacity for language and regret and wonder, you do what all of them do. You stop, you drift, you let the maintenance happen. The culture that tells you sleep is laziness has it backward. The culture that awards the early riser without asking what the early rising cost has its accounting wrong. The culture that treats wakefulness as productivity and sleep as the gap between productive periods has misunderstood what is happening in the gap. The gap is where the brain earns the right to do what it does when you are awake. The gap is where it files what it learned, clears what it should not keep, repairs what was used, and rehearses the emotions that the day asked it to carry. The gap is where your immune system runs its deeper protocols and your hormones find their calibration and your appetite finds its honest register. The gap is where the body pays for the day and prepares the credit for tomorrow. You cannot bank the sleep you skipped. The research on this is consistent. You cannot catch up on a weekend what you shorted across a week. The performance impairment, the immune deficit, the metabolic dysregulation, the amyloid that accumulated in the one sleepless night in Chokri Kajori's 2018 study in the living human brain, these costs are real costs, not hypothetical ones. Some recover with adequate subsequent sleep, some may not fully recover. The body is resilient, but it keeps accounts. And what the accounts show over and over in the rat that died in 3 weeks, and the human who hallucinated on day 8, and the vaccine that worked less well, and the cold that took hold more easily, and the blood sugar that ran a little high, and the weight that crept up, and the amyloid that built in the tissue of the sleeping brain that did not sleep, is that sleep is not optional. It is as optional as breathing. The pressure to sleep is the same kind of pressure as the pressure to breathe. It does not negotiate, it waits, so here you are. At the end of the night, at the far side of all of this, the morning light is somewhere near. The melatonin is fading. The cortisol will rise soon, as it always does before waking, nudging the body toward consciousness with a gentleness that the alarm clock does not always replicate. The adenosine has been cleared. The clock has kept its time. The cycles have run their 4 or 5 or 6 full rounds, each one a complete operation, each one doing the work that the next day will spend. You did not choose to do any of it. You lay down and it happened, the way breathing happens, the way the heart beats. The ancient machinery took over, the spindles fired, the delta waves rolled, the CSF moved through the channels, The hippocampus ran its rehearsal. The brainstem held the body still, while the mind went wherever it goes in the dreaming hours. All of it, every stage, every cycle, every molecular oscillation in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, every pulse of cerebrospinal fluid caught on the scanner of Fultz and colleagues in 2019, every gene named for a period of time, every duck keeping its outward eye alert, every jellyfish slowing in the dark water, every piece of this ancient, non-negotiable, universal, actively productive stillness. All of it was for you. All of it is what it means to be a living thing that needs to face another day. Sleep is not the absence of your life. Sleep is the maintenance of it. The next time you lie down, there is nothing you need to do, nothing to manage or achieve. The machinery will run without your supervision. It has been running your whole life, and it ran long before your particular life began. You only need to let it happen. Let your breath slow. Let the spindles come. Let the tide of cerebrospinal fluid find its channels in the dark. You're moored safe in the sleepy harbor now. Drift off.